Thank you for the opportunity for sharing my story and sharing my journey with you today. I hope after today's presentation you'll have some food for thought. So obviously the next question is, what is my story? I was diagnosed with stage 3 rectal cancer last year at the age of 31, which is obviously quite a shock. But yeah, I'll be sharing my insights and my story with you guys today. So just on the agenda, very shortly, I'll be sharing obviously my journey for the past year, thoughts, emotions, what happened, what did I think about, what did I try and get in place, and then the controllables, so what is it that you can do, from your side to be as proactive as you can for something like this. Just a note, at this stage, I'll be switching off my camera, just so I don't get in the way of the slides. Thank you. Yeah, so my story started in June 2022. I had troubles with constipation and with some blood coming out of my stool, which is obviously quite worrying. So I went to go see a general practitioner. His thoughts were, there's a very high probability that it's an internal hemorrhoid, but let's do a colonoscopy just to be sure. Went for a second opinion. That doctor echoed exactly what the first doctor said. 99% chance internal hemorrhoid, but let's do a colonoscopy and be sure. So then I went for the colonoscopy. They found a mass, did a biopsy on the mass, and that's what led to the diagnosis a couple of days later. So stage 3 rectal cancer, and the tumor was 5.5 by 3.5 centimeters. Now, obviously at this stage, emotions rush onto you. Everything happens so quickly. You're still trying to deal with the diagnosis, but next thing you know, you're at oncologist, working on your treatment plan. The doctor or the physicist has already said, these are the operations to follow. So my first operation was to get a stoma bag, to help with any complications on the rectum while radiation and chemo was supposed to happen. So my radiation and chemo plan, I started off on chemo pills. So I had to take chemo pills 3 times in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evenings. And then I had to go for radiation on the weekdays for 5 weeks on end. So at that stage we had to drive about 45 minutes to get to the radiation room, and then radiation was like 5 to 10 minutes, and then we had to drive back. So there was quite a lot of driving up and down. But the whole idea of the radiation and the chemo was to shrink the tumor, so there's a higher probability of success in the operation itself. So that luckily happened when we tested a couple of weeks, or I think it was 8 weeks after finishing off with radiation. The tumor shrunk. It went down to 2.5 by 1.5 centimeters, so they could do the operation at a lower risk. So in December, they removed the bottom part of my colon, they removed the rectum, and they sewed my inner shut, and hence the stoma bag, which is now a permanent fixture. So that was obviously a very big change for me. Luckily, the operation was a success, and everything went well. So they sent what they cut out for more tests, and of the 20 glands or lymph nodes that they cut out, 2 of them still had active cancer in them. So I had to go for precautionary chemo. So the next step was to change from chemo pills to actually getting a chemo port and having chemo infusions. So that's quite a bit of a session. I think it's about 4 to 5 hours each time. So I had to do it in 3-week cycles. So you go in for your 4 or 5 hour session, and you essentially knock down for about 6 days. Then you kind of feel pretty bad for another week, and then in the last week you kind of feel average, and then it all repeats itself. So I think I had to do about 5 or 6 cycles of that. So my final round of chemo was in May 2023. Then I went for my follow-up tests, and luckily nothing showed up on the scan, so technically in remission, or officially in remission, and still so today. So hopefully long may that continue. So as you can hear from the story, your expectations and your reality, they really match up. So it's always good to plan and be proactive, and try and think of everything that could happen, and try and prepare for that. So what is in your control? Obviously your choice of medical aid and your gap cover. what plan you're on with your medical aid or what plan you can afford, as well as whether you have gap cover you can control. Risk cover, we'll get into some more detail in the following slides. Your emergency fund, what that is, how it can be used, and then your legacy planning. Okay, so starting us off, medical aid and gap cover. This should be the starting point for emergency health planning. The type of plan you have for your medical aid or hospital plan, very important to know the benefits that they offer. Reflecting back, my medical aid or my medical plan, it had a very good oncology benefit. So I had 200,000 Rand of oncology benefits for the calendar year, and then from there the medical aid covered 80% of all costs. So essentially 20% was from my own pocket. That's where gap cover comes in. So you submit that 20%, those extra payments to gap cover, and they cover that. I was very lucky in the sense that the medical aid benefits reset at the start of the calendar year, and increased as well. So that was very good for my own pocket and for what was submitted. But having to recon, looking back on everything that was claimed to the medical aid, or at least submitted for claims to this medical aid, you'll see it's almost 700,000 Rand. So I think that's a very good number to start out with. So obviously if you don't have medical aid or gap cover in place, then you'd have to pay roughly 700,000 Rand out of your own pocket, and not many people have that just lying around ready to go. So that could be a risk for your financial well-being. Then if we take a look at risk cover, what can you use it for? It's to pay off debts, whether that be mortgage or loans you have at your death, to leave some cash for your dependents, to create some liquidity in your estate. Estate costs, executors fees, estate duty, you need liquidity for that. And then for business interest, specifically for key man and buy and sell policies. Your cover options include self-insuring, so having a big pile of cash available and paying for any emergency from your cash. Individual insurance cover, so that would be in your personal name with your different investment providers. And then your group insurance cover is the cover you'd have with your employer. Most employers offer only life cover and some sort of disability cover, whether that be income protection, the monthly benefit, or disability, the lump sum benefit. They rarely often offer a critical illness, and very few of them actually do. So maybe just to break down risk cover even further, you get your life cover, your income protection, your lump sum disability, and your critical illness. I'll expand on each of them in the following slides. So life cover, very simple. You decide the amount you want to insure yourself for, you nominate a beneficiary, and a lump sum pays out on the event of your death. Disability cover, as mentioned, it could be a monthly benefit, which is known as your income protection, and it could be a lump sum cover amount, which is known as capital disability. You could have both, or you could have only one of the two. Then moving on to critical illness, again, it's insurance, and it provides a lump sum payout if you were to contract a critical illness. I think a very important note for critical illness is that it has no relation to the expenses you have incurred during your illness. So as an example, let's take my 700,000 Rand. If I only had 300,000 Rand critical illness cover, but my expenses are 700,000 Rand, they won't pay out 700,000 Rand. They'll pay out 300,000 Rand, which is your insured amount. So it has no bearing on the amount you actually spend, but it is an insured amount, so you decide how much you can insure yourself for. All right, then how much is enough? That's the next question. So I think this illustrates it fairly nicely. So your risk is your total expenses that you would need to pay. Your investments cover some part of it, and what your investments don't cover is the capital risk that that is the risk that you require. So if we look at an example, if someone has 100,000 Rand of cash available, but their need is 10 million Rand, then they have quite a large shortfall. But the opposite is also true. If you have 100 million Rand in cash, then your need for risk cover is probably very, very limited. So this will be based on an individual basis. So you should know what you have, where you have it, and that should determine the amount of risk cover you should be putting in place, to help yourself. Moving on to claim statistics, this is something that, it's easy to think you're Superman and it will never happen to you, especially when you're younger. So I think taking a look at the claim statistics might just prompt you to take this more seriously. So 110,000 South Africans diagnosed with cancer every year. That's from Sanlam. And it was quite evident in, I think the chemo room where I was in had about 12 chairs, and most of the chairs were full every Friday, every 3 weeks that I was there. So it could just be a factor of the day, that it's Friday and that it's busy on Fridays. But it was quite scary to see that every time I was there, it wasn't just me. There was a lot of other people there as well. Then from Sanlam again, 1 in 3 people suffer from high blood pressure, which is a major risk for heart attacks and strokes. So that also has a bearing on your critical illness claims. And then just Liberty and PPS. Liberty paid out just over 900 million and PPS just over 400 million in critical illness claims. So I mean, it's not an insignificant amount. So a lot of people are affected by this, and I don't even want to think of everyone that didn't have any cover in place. So how were they affected? How were their families affected? That's not a good thought to have. Then just looking at some claim statistics from Liberty, splitting it up between male and female claims. Interestingly enough, from here, under 35 age band, that's where the most people are heavily underinsured. And those are us, I'm going to call us youngsters. We think this won't happen to us yet, or this only happens at a later stage. And I think the statistics backs it up slightly. You'll see on the right hand side, the claims increase as your age increases, which I think is also fairly standard. But maybe just to add to that, if I didn't have any cover in place and I was diagnosed with cancer, I would have struggled for the rest of my life to get cover in place. And if I were to get cover in place, it would have been extremely expensive. So I think that's the one part, is to struggle with it, and the other part is the expensive part. The sooner you start with your critical illness cover, the cheaper it is. So if we take a look at all the claims, all the personal risk cover claims from Liberty for the 2022 year, you'll see cancer and cardiovascular diseases and disorders make up roughly 50% of all claims. And I think that's pretty important to note. That of all the claims, these are your most claimed for. So definitely something to take serious. Worth knowing. On the female side of things, for all claims, 37% for cancer. So that's for all claims. So that includes life cover, critical illness, disability. For male, much closer, but again, cancer, cardiovascular, pretty much close to 50% on that. While your lifestyle protection claims are just claims for critical illness cover, you have cancer pretty much leading the way. The numbers don't lie. It's quite fascinating to look at these statistics on a yearly basis, but it is also quite scary. So just on the most claimed cancer type for females, it's breast. Almost half of all claims are for breast cancer, and for males, it's 32%. So I think it's important to know these figures and to be aware of them and to be proactive. So get your cover in place, or at least speak to someone about starting the process. You never know when something's going to happen. Moving on to the claim process, this was quite a seamless process actually. So once I got the diagnosis and kind of settled in after everything, I reached out to my insurer, and it was very simple. They sent me a claim form. I had to attach an oncology report, which my doctor sent to me quite quickly. And that was submitted at the start of September. And just to show you some dates, 2 weeks later my personal cover paid out, and 3 weeks later my group cover. So it is possible as well to receive payouts from your group and personal cover. I think they should dovetail, and those could essentially replenish the funds that my wife and I have already used. So speaking of the funds that we've already used, the emergency fund was probably the first thing to go. Any sort of emergency savings we had in place was just chowed up very, very quickly. having to drive from Riebeek West to Paarl every day for 5 weeks on end. I don't think anyone listening to this that works from home has 8 tanks of petrol, in their monthly budget. So, for an emergency fund, I think we as financial planners, we all advocate for 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. It should be easily accessible, so most of the time these investments are in a cash type investment or savings account. And for those of you that have bonds and have access bonds, it might even make sense to park your cash in there. Then just touching on some of those unplanned expenses that came across over the journey. I've already touched on petrol and diesel, but that was a very large one. Something else that came up was a change in diet. Something small, especially with the stoma bag, was my choice of milk. So standard milk, your full cream milk. The stoma bag's quite sensitive to the milk, or at least my system is. So I had to change to almond milk. And a 1 liter box of almond milk is about 3 times the price of standard milk. And that's something small, but it certainly it can add up over time. Something else that was quite important for me was fertility testing, or the fertility clinic. Being young, a family is still a priority for me and my wife, and so that was something we had to get done. I'd rather not expand on that journey or that experience, but very weird indeed. But also relatives coming to visit. Some days my wife couldn't get off from work, or she was really busy, so I had to ask my father to come pick me up and take me home. So what do? You pay for his petrol, and you give him a lunch, or you invite them for dinner. And those are all expenses that you don't necessarily have too often, but it could be something that builds up as well. And then just to note, these expenses, that if you do have these expenses, to make a note of them, keep them somewhere, keep your invoices, keep your proof of payments around. It's very possible that if gap cover and medical aid don't pay for it, that it could qualify as a tax deduction for medical expenses. So it's always good to keep those slips. Then moving to general admin, I was lucky in the sense that I had my wife with me, and she could do everything that I couldn't do. But I think it's really important to have someone you trust. Someone has to keep an eye over you, whether that's your spouse, or whether that's your roommates or your family. On those days where I was pretty much laying down from chemo, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't make food. I couldn't stand up. The best I could do was get to the bathroom, essentially. So only in the second week you get better, and you can essentially maybe walk outside the house a bit on the front lawn. But those first couple of days, you can't think about driving. You can't think about taking your medication. Someone has to help you with that. You don't even get to making food or going to the shops or anything like that. So it's important to have someone you trust that can only aid in the healing process. And I think it's also important to note that at least one person needs to know how to access your bank account. For those unprepared payments that come along, you can't really expect someone else just to cover them and you reimburse them at some later stage. So I think it is quite important that at least one person knows that. Then moving up to legacy planning, this was one of the things that dawned on me first. So once we got the diagnosis, my first thing was like, oh flip, is my will in place? Is everything in place for my wife if something was to happen to me? Like what if I were to pass? You immediately go to worst case scenario. So I think one of the most important things is to have your will up to date, and have it up to date regularly. Whenever one of your circumstances change, update your will. Take a look at your beneficiary nominations on your investments. Some of your investments allow you to nominate beneficiaries, so be sure that's according to your wishes. Something I had to investigate as soon as the diagnosis happened was a living will and a general power of attorney. So for a living will, essentially this guides your doctors and your family, if you're in a vegetative state or irreversible coma. So if you're running on machines, you can communicate your wishes to your family and to your doctor, to help them. So I know my wife would probably work for, I don't know, years and years on end and keep me on on the monitor and hope for a miracle. And I'm not sure I want that for her. I don't want that life for her. So that was something I had to look at very, very quickly. And then a general power of attorney is essentially giving someone the permission to sign on your behalf. So if we had to access any of my investments, I had to put a general power of attorney in place where my wife could sign on my behalf. So if a withdrawal or something like that had to happen, then we could just submit the claim form with a general power of attorney, and they'll accept it. It is also important to note that general power of attorney is quite different for banks, and they usually don't recognize the standard one, so you might have to have another general power of attorney for your bank as well. So where does this all fit in? Essentially, when you look at your financial plan and in the process, you have to develop your plan across 4 areas, essentially optimizing each area. First one is your cash flow, so that's your income, that's your expenses, know what comes in, know what goes out. Then your investments, we touched on one part of it, which is the emergency fund, but optimizing your investments over time. The risk, we touch on the risk, that's your life cover and your disability cover and your critical illness. And then succession or legacy planning, you should look at each one of these areas separately and optimize for your own scenario and for your own aspirations and aims. And you should take it seriously and be proactive about it. It's easy to say, I'll get to it tomorrow, I'll get to it at a later stage. But I do think it's quite important to get to that as early as possible and as quickly as possible, and then agree and develop a strategy for each of these areas. Very important, you have to implement your plan. It doesn't help you have the best plan available but you don't implement it. That just kind of go nowhere. And then reviews are also quite important. So obviously my scenario has changed quite a bit now, so we had to do another review of my personal finances once we went through everything. So whenever something changes that affects, whether that be buying a house, whether that be getting a kid, whether that be your kids going to college or to university, or whether you're retiring, that's just one of the blips on the radar. And every time something happens, you have to review and you have to keep an eye on it. So what does reviewing enable you? It enables you to be in control, informed, and involved. And it's very important to note that your financial plan is your aims and aspirations that you're trying to reach with your own money. So I think it's best to be educated and to stay informed, and stay involved with the plan, so you have control over it. I think that's very important, and you must have buy-in. Otherwise you'll just jump around and change plan and go all over the show, and then essentially you'll also have a plan that doesn't work. So I want to leave you with the next thought. It's essentially balancing 2 dynamics. The one is eating well and the one is sleeping well. So eating well essentially refers to living your life at this stage, being sure that you still get to have a fulfilled life and chase your aspirations and your goals and try and reach them, but also sleeping well. So have your risk cover in place, have enough savings in place, save enough for your retirement. That provides you with peace of mind, and essentially if you have that, then what a bargain. So yeah, thank you. That's all from my side. Please feel free to reach out to me whenever you have any questions, or if you have any questions. You can also go onto Fiscal Private Clients' LinkedIn page. You can reach out to us there. But yeah, that's all from my side. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day.